I still remember my dad telling me he had seen Terminator 2 in a movie theater and that the person sitting a few seats away from him had never known anything about the previous film. When the scene in the hallway with the bouquet of roses and the pistol happened, my dad said he had never heard anyone gasp so loudly in his life. You understand that the T-1000 is very evil, but you would never think that the T-800 is actually the good guy. I often think about that and envy the experience that man must have had. And that precise moment is why Terminator 2 is not just a sequel, but a rare psychological twist for the audience. And then, when the smoke from the gunshots clears, a series of behind-the-scenes truths begins to emerge that are even more shocking than the twist itself. The CGI scenes were actually created with mirrors and twin sisters. Dyson's death was constructed from real-life trauma cases. The film nearly received an X rating due to extreme levels of violence. And today, we open the door once again to the secrets behind the filming of 1991's Terminator 2. Judgment Day. Number 20. The film's action figures. A glance at a mountain of Terminator action figures is enough to tell you you're looking at the 90s, an era when an adult film full of weapons and death could easily enter a child's bedroom. The toy line based on Terminator 2 was handled by Kenner, the same company responsible for the Star Wars and Ghostbusters dolls, and they held nothing back when it came to exploiting the film's universe. I distinctly remember the feeling of holding a plastic T-800 in my hands. If you yanked hard on its arm, its face would snap open, revealing the metallic endoskeleton inside. For a child, that instant was pure magic. I carried the figure everywhere muttering, "I am the Terminator," not wanting to be John Connor, but Arnold himself. Looking back, many of those figures seem absurd. A T-800 in a pink shirt, a T-1000 that barely looks like Robert Patrick, Terminators with their own vehicles, gas masks, and all kinds of accessories that never appear in any scene. But back then, no one cared because they were solid, heavy, and exaggeratedly cool. Number 19. Arnold Schwarzenegger was paid such a high amount for every line he spoke in Terminator 2 that, by itself, it seems like a perfect summary of the entire 90s action movie era. Remember, for this film, his salary was $15 million, one of the highest checks in Hollywood at the time. What is surprising is how little his character speaks. Throughout the entire footage, the T-800 pronounces about 700 words, which is equivalent to more than $21,000 per word. Lines like "I'll be back" or "Hasta la vista, baby" were literally worth more than the annual salary of many Americans at the time. Number 18. Linda Hamilton's transformation from waitress to warrior. To achieve it, she underwent rigorous training for about 3 months, 6 days a week, with multi-hour sessions combining physical preparation, strength and endurance work, and a strict diet to refine her body. Additionally, she received specific instruction in weapons and combat from Uzi Gal, a former Israeli Special Forces commando. Who taught her to shoot, reload, and move like a professional operator, incorporating judo and military techniques into her routine. Thanks to this, everything from the way she grips the shotgun to how she advances clearing a room is based on real tactical training, not just a pretty choreography for the camera. The physical transformation was equally shocking. She lost weight, gained muscle, and sculpted defined arms and shoulders that gave rise to one of the most iconic images of 90s action cinema. Number 17. One of the first movies promoted on the internet. In 1991, when Terminator 2 premiered, most of the public didn't even know what the web was. There were no social networks, official websites, or on-demand trailers. For almost everyone, movie advertising was limited to television, newspapers, and posters in theaters. However, T2 took a step ahead of its time. The studio partnered with Quantum Link, a service for Commodore computers that would later become AOL. On that rudimentary platform, they published press releases, promotional images, and behind-the-scenes information. Although few had access, those who did felt they were touching the future. Today, it seems trivial, but in the early 90s, it was an audacious experiment. Hollywood had no idea that the internet would become the center of mass media, but Terminator 2 had already advanced, just like in its own story, a message from the future arriving in the present ahead of time. Number 16. Robert Patrick trained to run without panting or blinking. The actor who played the T-1000 set out to make his entire physical performance as machine-like as possible, which included running at high speed without showing agitation or emotion. In the scene where the T-1000 chases John Connor through the drainage canals, Patrick was really running at full speed, but his face remained impassive, his gaze fixed, and his chest barely moved. He trained for weeks to control his breathing and achieve this effect. At the same time, he deliberately minimized blinking because he considered it a biological reflex that a machine does not need. Even his running style, stride, and arm movement were carefully studied to eliminate any trace of humanity. The result is a villain who doesn't roar or make dramatic gestures, but who still chills the blood. The T-1000 doesn't seem to be hunting. It is simply advancing, tireless, and unwavering. This inhuman control is what made Robert Patrick one of the most terrifying villains in the history of action cinema. Number 15. The T-1000's liquid metal appearance required the invention of new technology. Remember the moment when the T-1000 steps on the tiled floor and his body closes in on itself like living mercury? In 1991, this was not just a shocking image, it was something that had never existed in cinema. The idea of a liquid metal assassin could not be achieved with makeup, mechanical models, or conventional filming tricks. Therefore, Industrial Light and Magic had to take an audacious step and invent their own technology. While the film was already in production, they developed custom software, new morphing animation systems, and completely new rendering processes just to bring the T-1000 to life. MoILM made the first 3D scans of Robert Patrick and used transformation algorithms for his body to melt, be pierced, and change shape before the audience's eyes. Every second of these effects took several days of processing. The process was so advanced that it was like building an entire technology company within the film studio. This was one of the first films to use photorealistic CGI on a human character, and the effect remains convincing more than 3 decades later. Number 14. The motorcycle and truck chase almost didn't happen. The truck versus Harley-Davidson chase is, for many, the pure essence of Terminator 2. Watching that metal giant jump into the void while John Connor flees on his small dirt bike is pure cinema. However, we were one step away from never seeing it. The problem was the usual one: money. In a production that was already the most expensive in history at the time, executives started sweating cold when they saw the costs of this sequence. It was not just renting trucks, it was closing the Los Angeles drainage canals, hiring an army of specialists, deploying extreme security measures, and burning thousands of dollars for every second of filming. The pressure from the studio was brutal. Cut the scene or reduce it to something minimal, they told James Cameron. But Cameron, with that legendary stubbornness that characterizes him, stood his ground. For him, it was not a simple display of adrenaline. It was the emotional turning point where John Connor stops seeing the T-800 as a threat and begins to see him as his protector. Without that epic rescue, the bond between the boy and the machine would have no soul. Against all odds, the director won the battle. It was filmed in the most difficult way possible, with practical effects, real jumps, and cables that had to be digitally erased frame by frame. A technical madness for 1991. In the end, that insistence gave us the most iconic action movie chase, proving that sometimes to make history, you have to fight the studio's bean counters. Number 13. Arnold didn't carry as much weight as you thought. Watching Arnold Schwarzenegger on screen, it's easy to believe his brute strength was real, especially when he handles massive weapons as if they were toys. However, the magic of cinema has its secrets. Even for the Austrian oak, carrying the authentic equipment of a Terminator would have been a logistical and physical nightmare. To make the action scenes fluid, and above all, safe, the props team did a brilliant job lightening the load. The most famous example is the iconic M134 minigun that the T-800 fires from the window of the Cyberdyne building. In the real world, that beast weighs more than 38 kilos, 84 pounds, not counting the ammunition belts or the batteries needed for it to spin. Handling that with the dexterity of a machine would have been impossible even for a Mr. Olympia. That's why, on set, Arnold used a modified version, a hollow shell, made with lightweight materials that drastically reduced the weight. In some shots, he didn't even have the internal mechanism. It was pure shell. The amazing thing is that no one noticed. Thanks to meticulous production design, clever camera angles, and precise editing, every movement of Arnold exudes a sense of absolute weight and power. They convinced us that it was a 300-kilo, 660-pound metal combat chassis, when in reality, much of that power was pure Hollywood ingenuity. Number 12. Puberty was John Connor's invisible enemy. When Edward Furlong was chosen to be the leader of the resistance, he was 13 years old with a child's voice. But there was a problem that even Skynet could not foresee. The filming lasted so many months that biology took its toll. Halfway through production, Furlong's voice began to change. In some scenes, he sounded like a boy, and in others, recorded weeks later, he already had an adult's register. This was a real headache for the sound team. Imagine John Connor changing tone in the middle of the same conversation. It was unacceptable. The solution was a technical odyssey. Furlong had to re-record almost all his dialogue in post-production, but to make matters worse, his voice was already too deep. The sound team had to work digital magic, altering the pitch of his recording so that he sounded like the boy who started the movie again. If you never noticed, it is because Cameron's sound engineers are the film's true unsung heroes. Number 11. The smile that was a mechanical nightmare. There is a moment in the extended editions that is pure gold. John Connor trying to teach the T-800 to smile so he would fit in among humans. What follows is one of the most disturbing and unnatural facial expressions ever filmed. Arnold's steel face slowly deforms into a rigid grimace, a simulation of joy that looks more like a system failure than a friendly gesture. Although today it is a cult scene for its uncomfortable humor, James Cameron decided to cut it from the original 1991 edit. The director feared that seeing the Terminator turned into a walking meme would ruin the tension. In a film heading towards a climax of ethical sacrifices and tragedy, such a ridiculous smile could break the spell. In the end, the T-800 kept his poker face, leaving that black comedy gem for the secret archives. Number 10. Cyberdyne's headquarters was actually a very common bank. Ready to rock? Ready. Let's go. The place where Skynet was conceived looks like a state-of-the-art technological research center, but the reality is much less futuristic. The exterior shots were filmed at an office building in Fremont, California, which later served as a branch of Security Pacific Bank. The production chose this location for its cold, angular, and modern architecture, enough to convince the public that the processors of the future were being designed there without the need to build expensive sets. When the protagonists break in to destroy the research, the glass hallways and offices we see are real workspaces. Even the massive explosion in the climax was carried out under extreme vigilance by the authorities, using security teams and special permits to ensure that the fireballs did not cause permanent structural damage. Surprisingly, the building is still standing today, surviving the cinematic apocalypse. Number 9. The nuclear nightmare that chills the blood for its realism. It is one of the most terrifying sequences in cinema, and even today, scientists and experts consider it one of the most faithful representations of an atomic explosion ever filmed. In the dream, Sarah observes the painful piece of children playing before the horizon explodes in a blinding, silent flash. What follows is authentic hell. The shockwave disintegrates the buildings, and a wall of fire consumes everything, turning Sarah to ashes as her hands melt with the metal fence. What makes this scene unbearable is not only the emotion, but its technical precision. James Cameron studied scientific reports and consulted with specialists to recreate step-by-step the sequence of light, heat, and shock of a real detonation. That is why, decades later, seeing that playground turned into a nuclear cemetery continues to impact as it did on the first day. Number 8. Arnold and the ordeal of the spinning shotgun. It is impossible to forget the T-800 riding his Harley while spinning a shotgun to reload with one hand, a movement that seems exclusive to a machine, but which behind the scenes cost sweat and a lot of real pain. The Winchester model. 1887 rifle was not designed to be used like that, much less while driving a heavy motorcycle. The weapon was crude, its mechanics stiff, and the modified loading lever for the spin constantly hit Schwarzenegger's fingers, causing considerable bruises and swelling. Arnold had to train for weeks with padded gloves to avoid destroying his hand before filming. Lighter versions were even manufactured to reduce the risk of serious injuries in the most demanding shots. That spin barely lasts a few seconds on screen, but it became one of the most iconic images of action cinema, demonstrating the machine's absolute mastery over its arsenal. Number 7. The T-1000 suit was so tight that Robert Patrick couldn't even sit down. The villain's icy, sharp appearance is largely due to his uniform. But what no one saw is that Robert Patrick literally couldn't sit down while wearing it. The costume was designed to be as tight as possible, aiming for the T-1000 to look like liquid metal compressed into human form, without a single wrinkle or unnecessary detail that would betray his humanity. Once the zipper was pulled up, the fabric was so tense that bending his legs or waist was almost impossible. During breaks from filming, instead of resting in a chair like the rest of the team, Patrick had to lean on a special support structure just to relax his body for a moment without ruining the suit. Despite the physical torture, that discomfort helped the character project that image of an unstoppable and perfect machine that terrified us so much. Number 6. Giant weapons for an extraordinary man. When Arnold Schwarzenegger wields the minigun, it seems like a natural extension of his body. But achieving that visual effect was a technical challenge. Arnold is a huge man, with broad shoulders and arms like tree trunks. When he held standard-sized weapons, they looked small, almost like toys, losing all visual impact of danger. To solve this, the props team did something very Cameron-esque. They custom-made weapons, larger than normal. They modified grips, barrels, and mounts so that the armament was proportional to Arnold's physique. The M134 was already enormous by nature, but it was redesigned to look even heavier and more menacing in the hands of the T-800, making the viewer feel the machine's destructive power in every frame. Number 5. The film was on the verge of an X rating for its extreme violence. Almost no one knows that. Due to a small miscalculation, Terminator 2 could have been an absolute commercial failure due to its brutality. In the 90s, the MPAA was relentless, and the first cut of the film was about to receive an X rating. The T-1000's cold-blooded murders, blades piercing skulls, and the rawness of the nuclear nightmare were too much for the standards of the time. An X rating would have been a death sentence. Theaters would not show it, and the press would not accept advertising. James Cameron had to give in, adjusting the rhythm of the editing and trimming the most bloody moments to maintain the threat without crossing the red line. In the end, he managed to keep the R rating by a hair's breadth, thus saving the film's box office fate. Number 4. The music of Terminator 2. Only a few initial bars are needed to know that you are entering its world. That heavy, cold, metallic sound not only opens the film, but seals the atmosphere with a sense of inevitability. Brad Fiedel returned for the sequel and did something that seemed impossible: elevate one of cinema's most iconic themes. If the first installment relied on raw electronic sounds, in T2, Fiedel made the music bigger, denser, and more intense. The action rhythms operate like a chilling precision machine, while the recurrent melodies evoke an impending apocalypse. The T-1000's theme is particularly terrifyingly icy, while the main theme carries a tragic grandeur that serves as a warning. The soundtrack was such a success that it remained on the Billboard charts for 6 weeks, something very rare for movie music at that time. Furthermore, the film made its mark using rock at the exact moments. Bad to the Bone gave the T-800 an ironic and perfect tone, and Guns N' Roses' You Could Be Mine brought the rebellious and chaotic energy that Terminator 2 needed to be complete. Number 3. Dyson's death was constructed from real trauma. You probably remember that moment in the smoky room with the alarm siren sounding. Miles Dyson leans against the wall, his shirt soaked in blood, and his trembling hands clutching the detonator, while his breathing becomes short and ragged. The kind of sound that makes the audience instinctively hold their breath. This scene is disturbing not only because it is tragic, but because of how real it feels. Dyson does not die movie style. His body betrays him every second with chaotic breathing and flickering consciousness as his lungs fail. The reason for this authentic interpretation is that James Cameron constructed the moment based on real reactions from patients with severe chest trauma. He wanted Dyson's death to be raw, uncomfortable, and stripped of any heroic beauty. Joe Morton understood this perfectly and, before filming, studied medical records to capture a crucial detail. People near death lose control over their speech, and their conscious struggle to stay alert is the most painful thing. Morton does not act in emotion. He lets his body guide the scene with wandering eyes and clipped words, achieving one of the most human and memorable moments in the entire film. Number 2. The DNA of Alien hidden among the steel. During the film's climax, when the chase reaches the foundry, the pace is so frantic that it's easy to overlook the details of the environment. But if you stop to observe the curved pipes that look like spinal columns and the wet metal reflecting industrial lights, you will notice something familiar. That mechanical and organic atmosphere at the same time feels instinctive to anyone who has seen 1986's Aliens. It is not a coincidence, as James Cameron transferred much of that aesthetic to the Terminator 2 factory. That air of an industrial hive where humans seem insignificant before massive and frigid structures, that was an intentional nod from the production designers. Although there's no official explanation from Cameron, the Foundry set is a silent tribute to his own xenomorph universe, a visual gift for the most observant fans. Number 1. The trick of the mirrors that were not mirrors. There is a scene in the psychiatric hospital that many would swear was created by computer. the moment Sarah Connor comes face to face with her double. That chill the audience feels is usually attributed to CGI, but the reality is much more fascinating because not a single digital pixel was involved. The woman behind the glass was actually Leslie Hamilton, Linda Hamilton's twin sister. And here comes the twist. There was no mirror. Both sisters were standing face to face, synchronizing every blink and every gesture with surgical precision. No wonder the camera was placed with such ingenuity that the viewer's brain automatically accepts the image as a reflection. Cameron repeated this trick later when the T-1000 imitates Sarah. No expensive post-production, just two identical people and millimeter-precise planning. It is proof of a film philosophy that is being lost. If you can fool the eye with real techniques, do it by hand. Now it's your turn. What is that moment from Terminator 2 that was burned into your memory in 1991? Tell us about it in the comments. And if you want to continue discovering the secrets and deleted scenes of Hollywood's golden era, don't forget to like, subscribe, and activate the bell. You will be surprised by everything the film industry has kept hidden for decades.